Hey guys, this is Eric from IONCINEMA, hosting alongside,
Kevin Jagernauth.
and so this week has been another interesting week in terms of what's going to happen with the film festival situation. As we know, this past Thursday would have been Christmas morning for us Cannes cinephiles. It's normally the day that they pick out and announce their selection. But prior to that, we had the news that they had to reconsider their dates because of the government essentially shutting down all activity until mid-July. So then there's been a whole bunch of interviews that City's done. Obviously, he had to give light on the situation. So I was just wondering, where are we at with the Cannes Film Festival situation? What are the actualities? What's going to pan out?
It's a big question. Every year at the festival, everyone puts their odds on what's going to win the Palme d'Or. I think now the question is, what will the festival even look like? I think that Thierry Frémaux, his position, he's not sure. His position seems to keep changing as the situation changes. Um, it seems now, given his interviews with the various trades, that he's open to doing something later this year, but maybe it won't even be like a full official festival, maybe done in collaboration with other festivals. Maybe there'll be titles may get like a Cannes 2020 sort of designation, but maybe won't be considered official selections. Who knows? It'll be interesting to see play out, but I don't think the summer is really a possibility anymore.
So today we're Friday, and it was announced that Telluride wanted to add a day to their festival, so they're feeling good about. Um, I don't know if they're feeling good, but I think they're hoping to expand and make their stressful, if there is an edition, less stressful. And Venice sort of like balked at the idea of there ever being a digital edition,
Mm.
and that in itself is a clusterfuck. So yeah, come September, what are we looking at with these two festivals?
Venice has already ruled out a digital festival, so I think it's unless that position changes, which it's very possible. I have reservations that it would be able to proceed at least in the same fashion as it would have in any other year. As for Telluride, I forget where. Actually, I think I read this on the playlist today. Um, Essentially, they're adding a day, but the amount of films they select would be the same. So
Mm-hmm.
the idea is that they would just spread out the screenings and maybe try and create a situation where it's not as I guess for the number of people attending, like it won't be so many dense pockets of people. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think the interesting thing is, out of all of this, is that TIFF made their announcement a couple weeks ago about their sort of thought process for what they're doing. But how do you think they're reacting to seeing how Cannes and Venice and Telluride are sort of now adjusting their plans?
So as we know, TIFF is very much a rehash of the Cannes Film Festival, and to a very smaller degree, Sundance titles. And I think that equation might change, obviously, because there will be no Cannes edition before September. And I kept on pushing this idea of move it to November or Movember. So I think for TIFF, they're going to be open to accepting world premieres, or like dealing on a much smaller um, a smaller scale with less inventory, and then just potentially doing a rehash of Sundance. Whereas Telluride are in a really peculiar situation because I mean, I think it's in upwards of 60% of their titles are from the Cannes Film Festival, and a lot of the interest for the people that pay for these $3,000 passes are the talent that attend. And so, like, I doubt that they'll be able to fly in people from all these other countries in the world. So it's just a puzzle in the making. Every single day is it's a confusing mess.
I think the other question too is, if Telluride goes ahead and they make their selections and all of that, will people from other parts of the world, given what's happening in the United States right now, be willing to travel into the States at all? I mean, I mean, not for political reasons, although that's a part of it, but certainly for health reasons, because there doesn't seem to be any plan, at least at the moment, for any kind of protocol or system to sort of deal with this. I think it's going to be a big question, particularly for Telluride, that's going to affect whether or not they can continue as normal.
hmm we like the same goes for cans. We might see, Thierry is involved with that Lumiere Festival, and I think
Yeah.
it's in the month of October. I think we might just see a celebration of film with the means that we have, which is celebrating the past and looking to the future with the past. So I could see for TIFF, I could see them replaying a lot of Berlin films, Sundance films, and the same could be said for Telluride. Of course, it's a much more intimate setting, and the townspeople there are just like any of these other film festivals that have been sabotaged by this. I think the locals are going to be a lot very sensible and not too picky, and so it's yeah. Every week I think there's just a whole bunch of question marks that pop up. But I was glad that City did a couple of press things with Variety and Le Figaro, and sort of like said, okay, well, um, the yeah, just the fact that he's open to potentially pushing it or putting something out without putting a large X on the festival well before we know what the situation is.
But I think we can both agree that, given his personality and reputation, he will do anything possible to make some version of Ken happen. I don't think there's a scenario unless he's exhausted all other avenues where he cancels the festival. Like, I think we'll see Ken in some shape or form somewhere, somehow
So like
this year. Yeah, I think it's just who he is. And he is right to a certain degree. I mean, he said in a couple interviews that Ken is like sort of the pillar of the festival season and the circuit, and he is right. He's correct in that.
mhm.
So I think he's carrying a bit of ego and also a bit of responsibility too to the filmmakers and sales agents and everyone who sort of rely on Ken to launch their films and get attention on them.
It might be an edition where it really is a truly French film festival for 1 year, and where the sampling size is perhaps smaller, but the international clout is sort of like put on the side. Let's move on to our other Cannes topic. So, as I had stated, Thursday is usually when the titles drop. They've been fairly consistent with that. And Screen Daily still put out a list of films that would have potentially been on the Croisette. And I think both of us are very much, we salivate at the ideas of there being titles that we hadn't considered. Also, there was a couple of items in there that I wasn't expecting, so they sort of gave that status update. So, first question to you is, what are titles that sort of like speak to you on some level? Let's say your most anticipated titles that you're looking forward to in this edition, or what would have been this edition.
The two that come to mind, or at least that are um, films that, we all know the anticipated title is the big one, so I'm kind of stepping outside of that.
Yeah.
For me, it would have been the Eskil Vokes. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
His film The Innocents, um, and Mona Fastvold's film, whose name escapes me right now. But I mean, they're just two filmmakers that, I mean, Eskil Voigt's been obviously working with Joachim Trier for all of his films.
Yeah.
Um, but he's just like a really interesting screenwriter. He's already made a feature. Um, so I'm just curious to see what his film that would have probably been an Insert Son Regard selection, what it would have been or what it will be. And Mona Fastvold, again, like a fascinating writer, collaborator with Brady Corbett. And I'm very curious to see what her picture is all about.
So yeah, the Innocents, both of the filmmakers that you mentioned there, it's both their sophomore features as
Mm-hmm.
directors. Um, in the case of Eskil, this one is it's a pretty cool tagline here. It's a supernatural thriller about a group of children who reveal their mysterious superpowers in the dark when adults aren't looking. So you could perhaps get a sense of the world that we're seeing with camera work that's perhaps lower leveled, different POVs there.
Well,
And
it also sounds like perhaps carrying on some of the themes that he addressed in Thelma, which I loved. I really loved that film. So again, like that he's like still mining that territory a bit is like pretty cool.
yeah, indeed. For Mona Fastbold, that was shot in Romania last summer. Actually, both of these films were shot last summer. Initially, I was thinking that she might end up going to Venice in a non virus world, only because Brady Corbet's last two features were shown there on the Lido.
Mm-hmm.
This one has Casey Affleck, Catherine Waterston, Vanessa Kirby, and Christopher Abbott. And Christopher,
Casey Affleck is just producing, I believe.
okay.
Yeah.
Um, and Christopher Abbott was also in her debut film. I believe it was called The Sleepwalker or
Mm-hmm.
Sleepwalking, and that was at Sundance in
That
2014.
was another film that I really, really liked.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was something that flew under the radar
Yeah.
and was well received by some critics. But yeah, I think together, Mona Fastfold and Brady Corbet just I was watching Vox Lux the other day. It's on Netflix, and I was listening to the dialogue, and I was thinking, wow, that tandem must like really be in tune with how their characters speak and the different
Mm.
worlds that the characters set in the Vox Lux inhabit. I just thought that there was a lot of smart writing, and I could see how that tandem probably, yeah, how they do great works of art so far.
So,
Uh,
and what are the films that you were looking that popped out for you?
so actually, Mona's was one that I was happy to see on the list, even though I like if I would had to bet a €1, I would have put on the Venice Film Festival. Um, One filmmaker that I was looking forward to seeing, and that's despite the fact that said he would probably have, he's in need of female filmmakers in the main comp.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Souvenir Part Two. I just absolutely appreciated and adored her the first part, which played in at Sundance, and I was well versed into. Um, I really thought that that character had a lot more to say and a lot more growing up to do. It's I forget her first name, but it's Tilda Swinton's daughter that
Mm-hmm.
headlines the Souvenir, and so I was looking forward in seeing how her new romance might better inform that character and in making better choices for herself and for her to find herself a little bit more. And I was curious as to Ariane Labide's
Mm.
participation in the second installment. I think she probably has a much larger media role. And so yeah, very much looking forward to Joanna Hogg's sequel. I mean, I'm never looking forward to any sequel, so I was thinking that that would probably be a shoe-in. I believe that film as well uh, filmed last summer, if I stand correct. I stand corrected. Um, and another filmmaker that I always look forward to um, is Michael Franco, the Mexican filmmaker. I had met him briefly in Marrakesh in late 2018, and he was telling me he was shooting a project in Mexico City that summer. And so the project's called The Dreams of a Few. The English title might change. I could see it being titled differently, but that was shot with very little. I'll call it fanfare. It was very low key, and so that's a filmmaker that's had a very good. I mean, he's born on the Croisettes. He won awards in the certain regard section, and I've been following him ever since his first film, Danielle et Anna, which was in Director's Fortnight. So I was thinking that this universe might be one that we would have seen in the main competition. So he's been
Mhm.
back and forth between the certain regard section and the main comp. So I was thinking that this would probably be his chance to get back into the main comp. But those are like out of the clout titles that are not the given ones, like the Wes Anderson film, but the for me these were like, oh, okay, that would have been a cool main comp or certain regard additions.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
let's talk about some of those bigger titles. I mean,
sure.
um, I think one film that almost everyone who had been planning to go to Cannes had at the top of their list, aside from The French Dispatch, would be Paul Verhoeven's Benedetta.
Yeah.
Um, that's a huge. That's going to be. It's still probably one of my most anticipated films of the year. Um, and it'll be curious to see where that goes from here. I'm sure everyone was banking on that showing up. Um, Another title is Ammonite, which I'm pretty sure was going to be ready in time to premiere, and that's Francis Lee's follow-up to God's Own Country. So I think another major title that's going to be looking for a place this fall. Um, and then you have other things that I think, and then another one we haven't touched upon, which is flying a bit under the radar now, is Andrea Arnold's Cow, her documentary that's been secretly shooting, I guess.
So yeah, so looking at the title, there was like a small mention of it at the beginning of the year, things to look out for. Obviously, when it's documentary film, it's a lot harder to keep, to do any tracking on. But the fact that it was mentioned in this article is actually uh, quite uh,
It's
kowtow,
notable.
if you want to call it that. We both know that she does have, I wouldn't call it a fascination for animals or wild animals, but she's always inserted that sensibility or these character sets in her films. We think back to Fish Tank, that wild horse, very uh, symbolic of the struggle of our female protagonist. And we were briefly talking about it beforehand, but you had mentioned that you revisited one of her short films, and we can think.
Dog, yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's and following up after this other film that was at Berlin called Pig. It's perhaps I don't know if
The
it's an
Barnyard
artistic.
Cinematic Universe or something.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm down for anything Andrea Arnold makes. But yeah, curious as to what she'll look for in the docu form. Um, Besides,
There's a couple titles as well that we were expecting, perhaps, that we were surprised to read were still in the finishing stages. I
Well,
mean,
yeah, the Leo Carax film was
yeah.
the one that surprised me. So if I remember correctly, he had started shooting this back in August.
Hmm.
And so why do you think there's a lag?
Who can say? I mean, I believe it wrapped in November, although don't hold me to that.
Hmm.
But I also think it's a musical, so I'd imagine the post-production process is maybe a little more complicated, a little more involved than it would be on a regular film. But I mean, who knows? I mean, I think that it's another question we could ask of Chloe Zhao and Nomadland, which Fox Searchlight announced in 2018, maybe. Like it feels like a
Yeah.
long time ago.
Yeah.
And that's another one which, according to Screen Daily, is still in post. But again, she's also in that time shot the Eternals for Marvel.
Hmm.
So she's been occupied for sure on a big project. And for me, a title that also stood out as being not ready, which I thought it might have been, would be Thomas Vinterberg's Another Round with Mads Mikkelsen,
Hmm.
which I think shot in the winter and seemed like a pretty not a straight walk, just sort of a standard drama film, but again, not one that seemed to be primed.
Yeah, there's a lot of these films that were mentioned. As far as like the Asian titles and the Middle East things, it's always like, oh, I didn't know that this was going on. Like the
Right.
for me, the tracking is always a little bit more difficult, just because of the financing structure in the Middle East. It's a lot more different in terms of like what they put out there, like sales agents and whatnot. It's a little bit harder for me to track. And for the Asian titles, it's always the same deal. It's like there's, unless you're in the know, a lot of these pop up and it's like, oh wow, this he actually got from this point to that point. Or the same applies to female filmmakers as well.
Hmm.
um and like yeah, so we begin the year at Ion Cinema. We begin the year with Nicholas Bell. We do our top like crazy list of our most anticipated foreign films. It's like it stretches like to 300, or a bit nuts. Two titles that I'm really curious about, and that were mentioned in this piece, and sort of like Cannes, not newbies, but they've been there before with other projects. Is there's a Greek film called Celine 66 Questions. Her name is Jacqueline. I think it's Lotso, and Clara Roquette's debut feature Libertad, which was workshopped at the Sundance Film Festival Labs. I think it was in the just the screenwriters lab, but it's a filmmaker that wrote this film called Petra. She was either the main writer or the co-writer. I quite like this film. I think it played there 2 years ago. So those are two female filmmakers to look out for, and I was just happy to see their names included in this massive Screen Daily list.
Well, a lot to. I mean, it's more stuff for us to keep dreaming about
Yeah,
until we're hopefully out of this quarantine and hopefully getting back to some form of life. But it'll be interesting to see where these films go. I mean, everything's ruptured, and their traditional path to the big screen or VOD is now disrupted. So we'll keep tracking them.
yeah. I mean, the worst case scenario is that we erase 2020, which sounds pretty awful just saying it out loud. But that 2021 is like everybody's going to be ready. Like that print will not be wet. It'll be far from being wet.
Yeah.
They'll have examined different ways to edit the same film. So it might make for one hell of a year. So anyway, that's the silver lining if yeah, if we don't get back to normal anytime soon. So that's a good recap on Cannes. Next two, and this week there was a weird little blurb. It was like one of those industry tweets that said a certain title is getting ready for VOD, and it picked up like wildfire. It was the fact that Fonzo the Josh Trank film, now called Capone for sellability reasons, I guess, is actually being put out. This is a film that I actually thought might play at TIFF as of 2019, because production on this film started back in April of 2018. So what's the deal, Kevin? It seems to have all the elements plus a Tom Hardy in a fat suit chomping on cigars. Like, is it possible that something's wrong with this film?
I mean, you and I both know any film that sits in post production for over a year with no whispers, we didn't even get like the standard official production still thing, like at all. So I don't listen. I'm gonna keep an open mind. I mean, I love Tom Hardy. The idea of him hamming it up as Al Capone is really appealing. And I don't know if you saw this, but Ryan Johnson tweeted that he's seen the film, called it, I believe, batshit bonkers, but in a really good way. Like he really endorsed it on Twitter. So that's adding a bit of a wrinkle as well. So I'm curious, but I don't. I watched the trailer, and I have to say, my my hopes aren't that high,
It,
even with Ryan Johnson's endorsement.
it feels like a man in a fat suit type thing. I get a sense that we've already, Scorsese gave us the final days of of his mafia-esque character. I when I saw the trailer, I'm like, oh, I get a sense that we've already done this, and Capone has been done um, one too many times. But when I think of Tom Hardy, I remember being at Sundance, having seen a film called Bronson, and for me, that was a game changer moment in his acting filmography. This is where he became a whole other entity, and the insanity that he brought to that character, and also the fact that he put on those pounds, and he never actually let go of these pounds. Um, Says that this Ryan Johnson comment, maybe there's something to it. At least I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point about, and that's probably a feeling I had when I had watching the trailer and didn't quite acknowledge it or think about it. But you bring up a good point that this type of gangster movie, it does feel dated. It does feel a little bit played out, unless the trailers cut a certain way to sell it, which is entirely possible. But yeah, it does feel like a movie from another era almost of gangster films that feels a little bit passe. And yeah, I mean, Tom Hardy has been swinging to different kinds of roles. Some of them, you know, like Venom or whatever, that are maybe not. I don't know that they seem larger than life, that maybe don't have the depth we're used to. So at
Mm-hmm.
least I hope that with this role, that it's a big performance, but that there's something more to the character than a big cigar and bad makeup.
Well, one thing's for sure is vertical entertainment, a label that I generally dismiss, are definitely gonna they'll probably make a good buck with this, and seeing that there's a huge captive audience, I could see this making a little bit of coin for them, regardless if there's a theatrical or not.
I'm actually very curious to know what their acquisition cost for the film was. I can only imagine that it went through a lot of rounds of rejection from other, perhaps more notable distributors or more prestigious before it landed there.
Mm-hmm. Good point. So, looking into this weekend and into next week, are there any specific titles that you're looking forward to checking out? Obviously, on VOD, on all these streaming services, there's a multitude of options.
Yep. Well, I mean, as you know, we're all inside with time to kill. So I think on my sort of viewing list for the week ahead, I'm going to head over to the Criterion channel, and see The Grifters, which I've somehow never seen, the Stephen Frears film. So I'm pretty excited to dive into that. Um, and the other film that's kind of poking at the back of my brain is It's an old Canadian film from the 80s called The Grey Fox.
Okay.
And it's part of like, it's in Canada. It's going to be National Canadian Film Day or something next week. So our local art house here, Cinema du Parc, you can rent it from them and check it out. So I just remember growing up, I kept hearing about this Canadian film. I may have even seen it once, but I think I'm gonna go back and check it out. How
Yeah,
about you? What do you have on your watch list for the week?
there weren't too many. It was almost like our music situation with Anne Murray. We didn't have too many films to look back on and say, oh, that was made in Canada. On my end, so this weekend is when I start looking at screeners to cover for films that are coming out next week. I feel like a rewatch is in order for a film that was actually ranked #1 at my TIFF experience last year, which is True History of the Kelly Gang. It's the filmmaker that gave us Snowtown, Justin Kurzel. And he just hit it out of the park. It really was my favorite, my cherry on the top film of that edition, and it's getting a VOD release with the IFC Films folks next weekend. I'm also curious about checking. I believe it's Hulu, but I'm probably wrong, or maybe it's the FX channel. There's a series called Miss America or Miss Americana with Kate Blanchett. And if you look at the directors, there's 9 episodes, and the directors list just like, it's like, oh wow, all these great filmmakers. You have the tandem that made Half Nelson. You have Janixa Bravo. You have some cool filmmakers that made this series. So I might dig into that. And what else? I'm gonna try to get access to. There's Apple TV that did a doc film with the Beastie Boys at the King's Theater in I want to say Brooklyn, but I forget where specifically it's located. And so yeah, I'm gonna try to see if I can.
Spike Jones joint.
Exactly. I know that I saw Screen Cap. Eric Cohn from IndieWire had interviewed Jonah Hill and Spike, and one of the B-boys, I believe, he had like a nice frame of those 4. So I was like, oh yeah, that's true, that's coming out. But besides that, I do grocery shopping, the mask and everything, recipes, and yeah, that's basically my how my weekend might look like.
Cool. Well, be safe. Bon cinéma. Until next week.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for supporting us, and we'll be back with you same time next week. Take care. Hey, this is Eric from IndieSponge. Check us out every Friday.